I found the photograph at an estate sale in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was a Saturday in November, one of those gray autumn days when the clouds hang low and the air carries the first bite of approaching winter. The sale was being held at a row house in the Rittenhouse Square neighborhood, clearing out the belongings of a family that had lived there for over a century. Among the items was a large photograph, perhaps 16 by 20 inches, showing what appeared to be a typical family portrait from 1910. The photograph showed 8 people, 2 parents and 6 children, arranged formally in a studio setting. The father, about 40, sat on the right in a dark suit with a white shirt and tie, while the mother, around the same age, sat on the left wearing a dark high-necked dress with a lace collar, holding the youngest child, a baby girl of about 1 year old in a light gown. 3 daughters, aged roughly 4, 7, and 10, were dressed in white lace dresses with ribbons and floral accessories. One sat near the center, while the older 2 stood beside the parents. 2 boys, around 6 and 12, wore dark suits with white shirts, the older boy standing behind his seated mother, the younger standing next to his father. Everyone maintained a composed, serious expression typical of early 1900s photography. But when I looked closely at the baby in the mother's arms, something made me deeply uncomfortable. The baby's face was different from the other children's faces, not in an obvious way, but in subtle details that seemed wrong. The shape of the face, the spacing of the features, the quality of the skin tone, all were slightly inconsistent with the other family members. And there was something in the baby's expression, even at that young age, that seemed disconnected, as if the child were looking at something beyond the camera, beyond the present moment. The estate sale coordinator noticed my interest. "That's the Morrison family," she said quietly, "taken in 1910. That photograph became evidence in one of Philadelphia's most disturbing medical scandals. The baby the mother is holding, that's not their child. Their real baby was taken by a doctor at Pennsylvania Hospital and used in unauthorized medical experiments. That baby in the photograph is an orphan who was given to them as a replacement without their knowledge." "That's horrifying," I said. "It gets worse." When the truth came out years later, they discovered the orphan baby's real parents had also been victims of the same doctor's experiments. The whole thing was part of an unauthorized study on heredity and development that destroyed multiple families. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, was written, "The Morrison family, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, May 1910. And below that, in different, more recent handwriting, "The baby is not ours. Dr. Blackwell took our daughter. God help us all." I bought the photograph along with a box of materials, medical records, court documents, newspaper clippings, and letters, for $1,800, knowing I had discovered something terrible. That evening in my hotel room, I examined the photograph closely. The more I looked at the baby, the more obvious the inconsistencies became. While the other 5 children all shared similar facial features, the shape of their noses, the set of their eyes, the curve of their chins, the baby looked distinctly different. Not dramatically so, but enough to be noticeable upon close examination. The baby's features suggested different genetic heritage entirely. And there was something else, the way the mother was holding the baby. There was a slight stiffness in her posture, a careful distance in how she supported the child, as if she were holding someone else's infant rather than her own. I began reading through the materials. What emerged was one of the most disturbing medical ethics violations I had encountered. A doctor who had been secretly switching babies and conducting unauthorized experiments, destroying families in the process. The newspaper clippings began with what seemed like routine births. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, April 15th, 1909. Birth announcements. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Morrison of Rittenhouse Square announced the birth of their daughter, Helen Morrison, born April 12th at Pennsylvania Hospital. The baby is the 6th child for the Morrison family. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, April 20th, 1909. Birth announcements. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Fletcher announced the birth of their daughter, Ruth Fletcher, born April 18th at Pennsylvania Hospital. The baby is the first child for the Fletcher family. But years later, a shocking revelation would connect these two births in a terrible way. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, June 15th, 1915. Shocking medical scandal uncovered. Doctor accused of switching babies for unauthorized experiments. Dr. Marcus Blackwell, 52, a physician at Pennsylvania Hospital, has been arrested and charged with medical fraud, child endangerment, and conducting unauthorized medical experiments on infants. Investigation has revealed that Dr. Blackwell had been secretly switching newborn babies between families for the purpose of studying heredity and child development. Over a period of 6 years, 1909-1915, he switched at least 15 babies, giving families children who were not biologically theirs, while taking their biological children for his experiments. The Morrison family of Rittenhouse Square is among the victims. In April 1909, Mrs. Catherine Morrison gave birth to a daughter, Helen, at Pennsylvania Hospital. However, Dr. Blackwell secretly switched the Morrison baby with an orphan infant from the hospital's foundling ward. The Morrisons took home and raised a child who was not their biological daughter, while their real daughter was used in Dr. Blackwell's experiments and eventually died. The orphan baby given to the Morrisons was actually the biological daughter of Thomas and Mary Fletcher, who had both died in a fire shortly after giving birth at Pennsylvania Hospital. Dr. Blackwell had taken their orphan baby and used her as a replacement for the Morrison child he had stolen. Most disturbing, Dr. Blackwell had been conducting experiments on the stolen babies, studying how environment versus heredity affected development. Several of the babies used in his experiments did not survive. I found the detailed investigation report, which painted a horrifying picture of systematic medical abuse. From the investigation report, June 1915. Investigation into Dr. Marcus Blackwell's baby switching scheme. Dr. Marcus Blackwell, a physician at Pennsylvania Hospital from 1905 to 1915, conducted unauthorized experiments on infants by secretly switching babies between families to study the effects of heredity versus environment on child development. Method of operation. Dr. Blackwell would identify families giving birth at the hospital. He would then switch their babies with orphan infants or with babies from other families, creating false birth records to conceal the switches. The families would take home babies who were not biologically theirs, completely unaware of the switch. Dr. Blackwell would then track the children's development over the years, comparing how children with different genetic backgrounds developed in different family environments. The babies he removed from their families were taken to a private facility where he conducted medical experiments, testing various interventions, studying physical and mental development documenting outcomes. Many of these babies became ill or died due to the experimental conditions. The Morrison case. In April 1909, Catherine Morrison gave birth to a daughter at Pennsylvania Hospital. The birth was attended by Dr. Blackwell. Mrs. Morrison was given anesthesia during delivery, which was common practice at the time. While Mrs. Morrison was unconscious, Dr. Blackwell switched her biological baby with an orphan infant who had been born days earlier. He altered the medical records to show the orphan baby as the Morrison child. The Morrisons took home the orphan baby, believing her to be their biological daughter, Helen. They raised her as their own, never knowing she was not their biological child. The real Helen Morrison was taken to Dr. Blackwell's private facility, where she was used in medical experiments studying infant development and nutrition. She died in October 1909, at age 6 months, from complications related to the experimental treatments. The orphan baby. The baby given to the Morrisons was the biological daughter of Thomas and Mary Fletcher. The Fletchers had given birth at Pennsylvania Hospital on April 18, 1909, just days after Helen Morrison was born. Thomas Fletcher was a laborer with no family connections. Mary Fletcher was an immigrant with no relatives in America. Shortly after their baby's birth, both parents died in a tenement fire. Dr. Blackwell took their orphan baby from the hospital's foundling ward and used her to replace the Morrison baby he had stolen. Because the Fletchers were dead and had no family to claim the child, Dr. Blackwell believed the switch would never be discovered. Discovery. The scheme was discovered in 1915 when a nurse at Pennsylvania Hospital, Miss Eleanor Walsh, noticed discrepancies in birth records and reported her concerns to hospital administrators. Investigation revealed the full extent of Dr. Blackwell's baby switching operation. Of the 15 families affected, most had been given babies who were not biologically theirs. The biological babies had been taken for experiments, with several dying in the process. I found letters written by Catherine Morrison after learning the truth. From a letter by Catherine Morrison, July 1915. Dear sister, I write to tell you of the most devastating news I have ever received. The child I have been raising for 6 years, the daughter I believe to be my own Helen, is not my biological child at all. Dr. Blackwell switched babies shortly after Helen's birth. He took my real daughter and gave me an orphan baby instead. I have been raising this child for 6 years, loving her as my own, believing she was mine. And all this time, she was not. My real daughter, my biological Helen, was taken by that monster and used in medical experiments. She died when she was only 6 months old, from treatments related to his experiments. The child I have been raising is the daughter of 2 people who died shortly after her birth, Thomas and Mary Fletcher. Their baby became an orphan, and Dr. Blackwell used her to replace my stolen daughter. I look at this child now, this 6-year-old girl I have called Helen for her entire life, and I do not know what to feel. I have loved her. I have raised her. She calls me mother. She knows no other family. But she is not my biological child. She was given to me under false pretenses to cover up the theft of my real daughter. And my real daughter, my biological Helen, is dead. She died 6 years ago, and I never knew. I have been grieving for a child who is alive while raising a child who is not mine. How do I process this? How do I explain to this 6-year-old girl that she is not who she thinks she is? How do I tell my other 5 children that their sister is not actually their biological sister? The authorities say, We can keep raising her as our daughter if we choose. She has no other family. Her biological parents are dead. We are the only parents she has ever known. But every time I look at her now, I see the lie. I see the baby who was substituted for mine. I see the evidence of Dr. Blackwell's crime. I am told that when the family portrait was taken in 1910, a year after the switch, the baby I was holding was the orphan child, not my biological daughter. My real Helen was already dead by then. I was posing for a family portrait while holding a child who was not mine, never knowing the truth. I do not know how to move forward from this. I do not know how to be a mother to this child, knowing she was used to replace my stolen daughter. Your devastated sister, Catherine. From a letter by Robert Morrison, August 1915. My dear brother, our family has been destroyed by Dr. Blackwell's crimes. The baby girl we brought home from the hospital in 1909, the infant we named Helen and raised as our daughter, is not our biological child. Dr. Blackwell stole our real daughter hours after her birth and replaced her with an orphan baby. We raised this orphan child for 6 years, never suspecting the truth. Our biological daughter died in Dr. Blackwell's experimental facility when she was only 6 months old. Catherine is devastated. She looks at the child we have been calling Helen and does not know how to reconcile her love for this child with the knowledge that this child was used to replace our stolen daughter. The child herself knows nothing of this yet. She is only 6 years old. How do we explain to her that she is not who she thinks she is? That the parents she has known are not her biological parents? That her real parents died when she was an infant? The other 5 children are confused and upset. They have grown up with this child as their sister. Now we must tell them she is not their biological sister, though she is the only sister they have ever known. When I look at the family portrait we had taken in 1910, I see the lie captured forever. Catherine is holding the orphan baby, believing her to be our daughter Helen. The 5 other children are posing with what they think is their baby sister. We all look like a normal, happy family. But it was all based on a terrible deception. Our real Helen, our biological daughter, was already dead when that photograph was taken. She had been dead for 7 months, killed by Dr. Blackwell's experiments. And we never knew. We were grieving over raising a stolen child, while our real child was dead and buried in an unmarked grave. I do not know how we will recover from this. I do not know how we can continue as a family with this knowledge. Your brother, Robert. The trial began in September 1915. The evidence was overwhelming and horrifying. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, October 15th, 1915. Blackwell trial reveals scope of baby switching scheme. The trial of Dr. Marcus Blackwell for conducting unauthorized medical experiments and switching babies has shocked Philadelphia as testimony reveals the full scope of his crimes. Evidence shows that Dr. Blackwell switched at least 15 babies between 1909 and 1915, taking infants from their biological families and giving them to other families or using them in experiments. His stated purpose was to study heredity versus environment, whether a child's development was determined by biological background or by upbringing. He created what he called natural experiments by placing babies in families different from their biological backgrounds. The babies he removed from their families were taken to a private facility where he conducted experiments on nutrition development, and various medical interventions. Several babies died in these experiments. Most disturbing is the case of the Morrison family. Their biological daughter Helen was stolen shortly after birth in 1909 and replaced with an orphan baby. The real Helen died at 6 months from complications related to Dr. Blackwell's experiments. The Morrison family raised the orphan child for 6 years, never knowing she was not their biological daughter. The orphan baby was the biological daughter of Thomas and Mary Fletcher, both deceased. Dr. Blackwell took their orphan child from the hospital's foundling ward to use as a replacement for the baby he had stolen. From the trial transcript, testimony of Catherine Morrison. Prosecutor: Mrs. Morrison, when did you learn that the child you had been raising was not your biological daughter? Catherine Morrison: in June of this year. The authorities came to our home and told us that our daughter Helen had been switched with another baby shortly after her birth in 1909. They told us our biological daughter had died 6 years ago in Dr. Blackwell's experimental facility, and the child we had been raising, the girl we called Helen, was actually the daughter of 2 people who had died shortly after her birth. Prosecutor: how did you feel when you learned this? Catherine Morrison: crying. I felt as if my world had ended. I had been grieving my lost child while raising a stolen child, and I never knew. I looked at this 6-year-old girl I'd called my daughter and realized she was not mine, that my real daughter had been dead for 6 years. Prosecutor: do you still consider the child to be your daughter? Catherine Morrison: I do not know how to answer that. I have loved her and raised her for 6 years. She knows no other mother, but she was given to me as part of a crime. She was used to replace my stolen daughter. Every time I look at her, I am reminded of what Dr. Blackwell took from me. Prosecutor: what would you like people to know about what Dr. Blackwell did to your family? Catherine Morrison: he destroyed us. He stole our biological daughter, let her die in his experiments, and gave us someone else's child to raise. He made us love a child who was not ours, while our real child suffered and died. And he documented it all as if it were legitimate science. He is a monster. The verdict came in November 1915. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, November 20th, 1915. Dr. Blackwell, found guilty of medical fraud and child endangerment, sentenced to 20 years in prison. Dr. Marcus Blackwell has been found guilty on multiple counts of medical fraud, child endangerment, and conducting unauthorized medical experiments. He has been sentenced to 20 years in prison. The jury heard evidence that Dr. Blackwell had systematically switched babies between families, conducting what he called natural experiments on heredity and environment. At least 15 families were affected. Several babies died in his experiments. Judge William Harrison stated, "You violated the most sacred trust between physician and patient. You stole babies from their families, gave families babies who were not theirs, and conducted experiments that resulted in the deaths of innocent children. You did all this in the name of science, but it was not science. It was cruelty and criminal abuse." Dr. Blackwell showed no remorse. He stated, "My research was important. The data I collected will advance our understanding of human development. The families affected by his crimes are left to deal with the devastating consequences of his actions." I found one more document, a letter written in 1960 by the orphan child who had been raised as Helen Morrison. From a letter by Helen Morrison Fletcher, 1960. I am 51 years old now. I was born Ruth Fletcher in April 1909. My biological parents died shortly after my birth, and I became an orphan. Dr. Marcus Blackwell took me from the hospital's foundling ward and gave me to the Morrison family to replace their biological daughter, whom he had stolen for his experiments. I was raised as Helen Morrison until I was 6 years old. In 1915, when Dr. Blackwell's crimes were discovered, I learned that the people I called mother and father were not my biological parents. My real parents were dead, and the Morrisons' real daughter was also dead. I will never forget the day they told me. I was 6 years old. They sat me down and explained that I was not their biological child, that I had been switched as a baby, that my real name was Ruth Fletcher. They said I could choose whether to keep the name Helen Morrison or reclaim the name Ruth Fletcher. I chose to keep both names. I am Helen Morrison Fletcher. I honor both sets of parents, the Fletchers who gave me life but died before they could raise me, and the Morrisons who raised me even though I was not biologically theirs. The Morrisons kept me. They could have given me up, sent me to an orphanage, but they chose to continue raising me as their daughter. I know it was difficult for Mrs. Morrison. Every time she looked at me, she was reminded that I was not her biological child, that her real daughter had died in Dr. Blackwell's experiments. But she loved me anyway. She raised me alongside her 5 biological children. She taught me to call her mother, even though I was not hers by blood. I look at the family portrait taken in 1910, when I was 1 year old. Mrs. Morrison is holding me in her arms, believing I am her daughter Helen. The 5 other children are posed around us, thinking I am their baby sister. We all look like a normal family, but it was based on a lie created by Dr. Blackwell. The baby in that photograph, me, should have been raised by Thomas and Mary Fletcher. Instead, I was raised by the Morrisons, because Dr. Blackwell stole their real daughter and used me to replace her. I have spent my life trying to understand what happened to me. I was used as a pawn in Dr. Blackwell's experiments. I was given to a family under false pretenses. The people who raised me were not my biological parents, but they were the only parents I ever knew. I am grateful they kept me and raised me. But I am also haunted by what might have been. If Dr. Blackwell had not switched the babies, the Morrisons' real Helen would have lived. My biological parents might not have died in that fire. Perhaps they would have survived to raise me. But I cannot change the past. I can only honor the truth. I am Ruth Fletcher by birth, Helen Morrison by upbringing, and Helen Morrison Fletcher by choice. I am the living result of Dr. Blackwell's crime, a baby who was stolen from her dead parents and used to replace another stolen baby. May God have mercy on Dr. Blackwell's soul, and may no other children ever be used as pawns in such experiments. Helen Morrison Fletcher, 1960. I spent months researching the case, examining records of medical ethics violations in early 20th century America, and documenting the long-term effects on the families involved. What emerged was a clear picture of how a doctor's obsession with research, combined with the power dynamics of the era and lack of ethical oversight, had destroyed multiple families. I wrote a comprehensive account examining not just what happened, but the broader context of medical experimentation and the importance of informed consent. The book was titled The Switched Babies, Dr. Blackwell's Experiments, and the Families He Destroyed. The photograph from May 1910 appeared on the cover. Looking at it, knowing the story, it became one of the most haunting images I had ever encountered. 8 people posed for a family portrait, 2 parents and 6 children. They looked like a typical, prosperous family from 1910, formal and proper in their studio poses. But the baby the mother holds is not her biological child. That baby is an orphan who was used to replace the Morrisons' real daughter, who had been stolen by Dr. Blackwell for experiments and had died 7 months before this photograph was taken. When you know to look, you can see the subtle inconsistencies in the baby's features compared to the other children. You can see the slight stiffness in how the mother holds the child. You can see the careful distance, as if some part of her unconsciously knew this was not her biological baby. The photograph documents a family that appears whole, but is actually built on a terrible lie. A lie they would not discover for another 5 years. A lie that would devastate them when the truth finally came out. I received many letters in response to the book. Some from medical ethicists, others from people who had been adopted or who had discovered late in life that their families were not as they believed. But one letter moved me most deeply. It was from the great-granddaughter of Helen Morrison Fletcher. Dear Dr. Morrison, thank you for researching and telling my great-grandmother's story with such care. Helen Morrison Fletcher, born Ruth Fletcher, raised as Helen Morrison, was my great-grandmother. She told me this story when I was young, explaining how she had been switched as a baby and raised by people who were not her biological parents. She said she had learned to accept what had happened to her, but that she always wondered about her biological parents, Thomas and Mary Fletcher. They died before they could raise her, and she was used as a replacement for another family's stolen child. That photograph from 1910 always made her sad. She would point to the baby in the mother's arms and say, "That's me, but I shouldn't have been there. The real Helen Morrison should have been there, and I should have been with the Fletchers." Thank you for honoring her memory and exposing Dr. Blackwell's crimes. What he did to those families was monstrous, and it should never be forgotten. Sincerely, Sarah Fletcher Morrison. The photograph now hangs in my study as a reminder of the terrible consequences of medical experimentation without consent and the lasting damage such actions cause. 8 people in Philadelphia in 1910 posed for a family portrait. But one of them, the baby in the mother's arms, should not have been there. She was an orphan used to replace a stolen child, a living piece of evidence in an unauthorized experiment that destroyed multiple families. This 1910 Victorian family portrait seemed ordinary at first glance, until you looked closely at the baby's face and saw the subtle inconsistencies suggesting different genetic heritage. Until you learned that the baby was not the Morrison family's biological daughter, but an orphan who had been substituted for their real child. Until you understood that this photograph documented not a family, but a crime, a doctor's experiment that stole babies, switched them between families, and left lasting trauma in its wake. A photograph that captured a family built on lies, holding a child who should have been elsewhere, while their real daughter lay dead in an unmarked grave. That's the eerie truth preserved in this image from May 1910. The portrait seemed ordinary, until they looked at the baby's face